Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast where we share stories, insights and strategies that go beyond some of the numbers we encounter in our work life. I'm Susan Triadon. I work with organisations who put people first. I've lived and worked in many countries. I've met people who love what they do and people who don't. People who bring their full selves to work and people who won't. And together with my guests, we place a lens on and focus in on the people side of work life. Because we know that it is people who do the work, not numbers. And if we are treated well, we will perform well and might even generate better numbers. Welcome to the latest episode of Life Beyond the Numbers, and today I am delighted to welcome Jonathan de Potter from Behold Retreats. Jonathan, you're welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers.
Thank you, Susan. It's a real pleasure to be here.
And you definitely have life beyond the numbers, because one of your top skills on your LinkedIn profile is financial modeling. But I don't think that has anything to do with what you do now, which we'll get into a little bit later. And psychedelics, or the world of psychedelics, is something that I know literally nothing about. And to prepare for this episode, I watched a Netflix documentary that features all sorts of comedians and musicians and, artists talking about psychedelics do and don't, and never do this, don't look in the mirror, do look in the mirror. There's all of this kind of stuff that they talk about. But something, I think it was Sting said, really struck me, because he said, if you see the world as part of you, you will treat it differently. And you will have an enhanced ability to be in the world. Does that resonate with you, Jonathan?
Yes, absolutely. And I think in a broad sense, what Sting is alluding to is the nature of consciousness and the nature of our being and our essence. And I think we live in a world where we are naturally led towards giving primacy to the outer world. Right. So we've got all these amazing senses. We've got all this amazing stuff going on, maybe not as quite as many travel opportunities lately as we might usually have, but still there's an abundance of stimulus in the outside world. And so we tend to give primacy to that. However, I think that's the trick, or that's the opportunity, as it were. And so what Sting is relating to is that through these experiences, whether it be expanded with plant medicine, with psychedelics, or through meditative practices, or even breathwork practices, other contemplative practices, prayer, to explore what's going on in the inner world begins to give us a very different perspective in the relationship between self and the outer world. And so what that's relating to is the elevation of consciousness. As we're able to develop our own understanding of what we are on the inside, then our understanding of the relationship between the inner world and the outer world begins to shift quite dramatically.
I know where to start because I have lots of questions, but for people that never thought about their inner world, let's start there. What do you mean by the inner world?
Yeah, sure. So a place I like to start is actually with some science, some facts,
Good.
Like hard facts.
Yeah.
So you may have heard me say this if you listen to a few of the things that I've said, but it's so compelling. So your typical Westerner has between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. This is science from the National Science Foundation. Pretty much 100% of those thoughts are egoic thoughts. The I, me, my. 95% are repetitive and 85% are negative. So we think all of the time, only about ourselves, the same things, and mostly bad stuff. And so the ego itself, this is the illusion of the separate self, linking this back to Sting's point. The illusion of the separate self is fundamentally fear-based. And so we have lived through generations of intergenerational trauma. We are overwhelmed by modern complexity in the modern world and the uncertainty that we find ourselves in. And so at the moment, I think more than ever, there's a lot of fear. And there's an opportunity here for people to begin to unpack what's actually happening here in my inner world. And I don't think that Corona is a coincidence by any stretch of the imagination. I think we've reached a precipice, a turning point for ourselves individually and also collectively to recognize the primacy of the inner world. And so whether it's through modalities like breathwork, meditation, etc., when people start to become conscious of their limiting thought patterns and their limiting beliefs, or say sit through a 10-day meditation retreat, they become quite alarmed actually by what's actually going on in the mind. Oh, I should have done this. Well, actually, that's a negative self-judgment. If something as harmless as that can actually really impact us. The other example that I sometimes give in relation to early childhood trauma, most people, they say, oh yeah, I had pretty good parents, a few mistakes, but like it was pretty good. But many of those things, and many of us have been really traumatized, even by things that are perhaps what we might describe as minor infractions. So an example I sometimes give is, imagine a 5-year-old child who's walking some groceries in with mom, and mom's just had a long bad day. And so the child drops a bag full of groceries. And in that moment, mom says, you never get anything right, just get out of the way. Now, for a 5-year-old, that can really take hold in the subconscious mind. The 5-year-old doesn't really have the ability to filter that between mom at the end of a bad day and what is true. And so then the next day, the child gets the ball at school during a game and plays back. Oh, you never get anything right, just get out of the way. So in that moment, the child passes the ball, and now she or he is on a pattern, right, in terms of the patterns of thinking about self. And that can fundamentally change the direction of a child and lead them down a very fear-based and limiting life relative to who they truly are.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine you're sitting in a meeting with your boss and you think, oh my God, we need to like fix this. But your message going on in your head is you never get anything right. Stay out of the way. And so you don't raise it at all and nothing ever changes.
Exactly. And often in relation to the boss, there's another dynamic here, which I think is interesting, which is people who find themselves in leadership positions are typically the most traumatized. And the reason for that is that they're the people who are most disconnected from their inner world. And so most require external validation to be made to feel whole, to be made to feel good enough. And so this is something that I would not have pictured 5 years ago, say, when I was trying to climb the leadership ranks at the prior employer and management consulting firm. But in essence, I very much see it now. And those are people who need external validation constantly because they're just disconnected from themselves.
So that's the traits that you need, or the skills you need to become a leader, is to be disconnected from yourself. Now, that is not what I would be advocating for at all. So bring us back then to that track that you were on, Jonathan. I think you worked for Accenture, and what happened?
Yeah, I was very blessed during my 5 years at Accenture. I had great mentorship across the organization. I was privileged to attend all sorts and facilitate all sorts of great trainings and learned a lot. It was pretty hard, pretty intensive. I was in the office most days by 7, would leave maybe around 10, sometimes even later. And so doing that for a number of years, I climbed the ladder and had more promotion opportunities ahead of me that were being dangled. When they promised to promote me to partner, I realized I don't think I'm going to be any happier if I get that promotion. So the next client, the next deal, whatever that next thing is not going to bring me incremental joy. So it has to sit somewhere else. I don't think that I've maxed out in terms of joy in life. So it has to sit somewhere else. So I was an atheist at the time, and I didn't believe or think that there might be a spiritual component to that, but I decided to take a year off, and as part of that traveled through South America for most of that time, and ultimately found my way to an ayahuasca retreat with a couple buddies of mine in Peru, which was a very challenging but also mind expanding and ultimately life-changing experience.
So ayahuasca is plant-based medicine, or a psychedelic. So maybe you tell us a little bit about what psychedelics are and what they do.
Psychedelics is an interesting term because it's defined differently by different people who have different interests. But broadly speaking, what we're talking about in relation to psychedelics is those that have a neurogenerative effect. So they can actually facilitate the growth of new neurons, which we didn't believe to be possible until relatively recently. Second to that, they facilitate an increase in neuroplasticity, which is the interconnectivity across regions of the brain. And this is particularly important because in the West, I think to a large degree, because we're just so overwhelmed by complexity, our brains have become highly patterned in terms of the neural pathways. And that actually is doing damage to the very software of the brain. Because we're so overwhelmed, we have to become patterned, which is a kind of energy efficient adaptive mechanism in response to all this complexity. You just can't meet the complexity on its terms. I think we all know that, right?
Like autopilot stuff.
Exactly. So with the developments in Web3 over here, and
crypto and
crypto and what's the latest Corona news, it just goes on, and you're just like, I can't possibly. So we develop patterns, of course. And so while that sounds positive, it's actually doing damage to the brain. And so that overly patterned brain or compartmentalized brain is what can actually lead to incongruent thoughts existing within a single consciousness. So an example I give is a man perhaps who says he loves his wife and he's cheating on his wife. In a brain that's not compartmentalized, that won't happen, because that's a single consciousness, and it's actually consciousness is working against itself. When we do this work and when the brain begins to reconnect to itself in ways, there's a lot of dissonance. We identify a lot of opportunities where we can be more congruent with our true self, because we've been holding perhaps these conflicting beliefs in our consciousness, or indeed in our subconscious mind, because we just don't have access to some of these things through everyday waking consciousness.
Wow.
So coming back to psychedelics, so the ones that we predominantly work with are psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, which is a combination of two plants, confusingly ayahuasca and chacruna, and those are combined, and that's a very complex medicine, something like 463 molecules within ayahuasca. So it doesn't quite fit the Western model of medicine, which is why it doesn't quite get the same attention that it deserves, and it's also you can't patent it and stick a label on it in the way that many commercial forces would like to. And then the third that we work with is 5-MeO-DMT, which is also known as the toad medicine. And that's generally recognized as 4 to 6 times more powerful even than ayahuasca. So incredibly powerful medicine, highly neurogenerative. During a breakthrough experience, it's quite common to experience complete non-duality, which is when reality itself breaks apart in front of us and we are joined to the universe. Tying this back to Sting and his quote, that's the sort of experience where I see people now as an individual piece of the universe that's almost been like twisted off like a balloon, those balloons that you get at a toy fair. So this is a very powerful medicine because it can show you, yes, indeed, you are one with the universe. And then our work is post-experience is we've been shown a light down the path, and our work is to begin to make the steps towards those states of consciousness without medicine. And so that's why these medicines are so powerful, is they can show us what's possible in terms of our states of consciousness. But then ultimately we have to begin the work ourselves. It's not that we want to become dependent on these medicines, on these psychedelics.
Okay, that's really interesting. So you're not like, I was never going to suggest this anyway. You're not trying to turn the world into drug addicts or become addicted to psychedelics. It's a tool essentially to fast track the journey that you're on, in a way, to maybe reveal stuff to you that you wouldn't do on your own.
Yes, I think that's right. And I'm not even necessarily pro psychedelics as such. I think it's a neutral tool. I think the tool is a perfect word for it, because if you to look at, a psychedelic community for the sake of conversation, it doesn't necessarily reflect the energy that you and I might aspire to. So it's not that necessarily you take a bunch of psychedelics, good things are going to happen. It's rather, it's the setting, it's the context, it's the intentionality, the way in which they are used, and the guidance and facilitation, the healing expertise that sits around the experience that makes the fundamental difference.
Okay, intentionality is a great word, and it's being used more and more for people to think about, well, what's your intention here and how can you show up with intention? So with that, if somebody were to go or decide that a Behold retreat is for them, what do they do? How does it work? Where does the intention come from?
Yeah, so I always encourage people to take the time and the energy to, number one, educate themselves, and number two, to really take the time and energy to develop their own intentionality in a very deep way, right? It's easy to go read a few articles or speak to a few friends and hear, oh, this is all really good. We actually had a journalist come to one of our retreats recently, and she had a very challenging time. And she was like, hey, this didn't match my expectations at all. And it just goes to show there's an increasing amount of commercial interest in this space. And so with that, there's a tendency to, shall we say, whitewash some of the, kind of embellish the upside and reduce the downside. Say, hey, this all the answers to the nature of the universe are here. This is what you want to do. And it's like, yeah, but that is true to a degree. Well, the answers to all of these things are within you. This is a tool to amplify your sensitivity to some of those lower level energies that might be keeping you away from your true self, the shame, the guilt, the fear, the grief, the apathy. But it's very important that people very much develop that, that intentionality for themselves ahead of embarking upon this. And then fundamentally, clients come for three different reasons. Number one, for healing, right? So PTSD, depression, anxiety, sometimes OCD. We don't work so much with addictive. We will work with clients that are clean now and had them in the past, although that is still more challenging work. And number two is growth in creativity, right? So expanding consciousness. People are like, I'm doing really good, but I want to be doing better. And then the third is, of course, spirituality. So people who want to reach and sustain higher levels of consciousness so that they can connect more deeply to their higher self, and in relation to that, often connect to their higher purpose. I think that all of us are here with very unique gifts to give. And I think we're, again, in an exciting juncture collectively, because more and more people are waking up to the fact that, it's not really how can I minimize the input to maximize the output that I can get? It's the other way around. It's what are my unique gifts and strengths that I feel really called from the heart to give out into the world? And then, of course, abundance is going to follow that, because each and every one of us is such a special soul that has so much. And so we're making that transition now, which is very exciting. And yeah, so when people do come to us, then answering your question, in essence, we tend to guide people on a more holistic journey. We guide clients in two ways. So one is a 7-week approach where we go deep with them and helping them get clear on their future self. We help them surface their mental and emotional blind spots ahead of working with the medicine. And we also teach them tools that they can use during working with the medicine so that they are ready for the work, because these are intensive experiences. And then we do typically a 1-week retreat where we'll do 3 ceremonies or 4 ceremonies over that duration. There'll be some yoga, some meditation, beautiful vegetarian food, time for relaxation, journaling, maybe a massage here and there, cacao ceremony as well to close things, maybe a fire on the beach. And then we guide them in the integration as well. So we will help them consolidate all of the insights and guidance and help them understand how they're going to bring that back into their reality, because a lot of our clients are busy people. So, they find themselves back in the office in 10 days later or something like that. And they're like, okay, how do I combine these two worlds? So some guidance in terms of integrating that experience and putting some things in place to continue to improve the elevation of consciousness and ultimately to continue the improvement of the human experience.
What's the danger of forgetting, or like you say, that person is back in the office and there's, I suppose, a conflict between what they know about themselves from what they've learned versus who they were before and who they need to be or should be in the office? Does that haunt a lot of people?
I get that question quite a bit from clients, because pretty often our clients are feeling pretty good about where they are in life, right? They want to go further, but they're like, there's a bit of like, I've got everything in the way that it should be. And I always tell them, I can't make you any promises, right? Either in relation to the experience, first and foremost, or in relation to what you may do and what changes you may introduce to your life as a result of this. We had one client who was a IT executive. He was running 3 companies and cybersecurity and very well connected in Silicon Valley. And he did 2 retreats with us. He went one at the end of his first retreat. He said, I've cleared 50 years worth of shit in 10 days. He was back with us in a couple of weeks doing another retreat. And then he moved to Kauai and bought a sailboat. And he bought an old car, and he's having the absolute best time of his life. And he's given up hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue with his company and everything like that. And he's never been better. They go straight back into their grind. They've had a powerful experience, but they're already on their path and they don't want to change too much. And so there is no right or wrong answer. It really depends upon the experience that people have, the downloads they get, and where they feel called, where they feel is most closely alignment to their purpose.
So in a way, it's almost like you're reconciling your inner world and your outer world and deciding for you, maybe you've increased your awareness of your inner world, but maybe the outer world is still where you need to play or be.
Absolutely. And in relation to that, it's all about manifestation. So when we try to teach our clients how to establish the vibration of what they want to attract in their inner world. And then the universe is already conspiring in order to, because it's magnetism, right? It's one of the fundamental forces of the universe. And so once we've achieved the vibration of what we'd like to attract, then the universe is already putting things in place energetically in order to bring those into our field. And that's something I would have cringed at and laughed at 5 years ago. And it probably only would have come from my mother. And I would have told her, Mom, I love you, but please, like, just enough. And that's just fundamentally how it works. We're creating from the inside. And so once we achieve the vibration, that's 90% of the work done.
I love what you said there, Jonathan, because I can just imagine, and I can imagine you meeting some of your colleagues, and it's nothing for them. I mean, even I know plenty of people, myself included, who might be skeptical about all of this. So, like, what was your turning point or your calling, if you can share that? What happened for you that was it, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. What you've said just reminds me of a question I've been asking all of my old mentors, and none of them can answer this question. And it highlights the fundamental problem, which the question that I ask is, what's the one thing that if you had it would make you truly happy, truly fulfilled? And these are smart people who are used to answering hard questions and used to asking very smart people very hard questions. And so when you see their eyes roll back and they can't answer that question honestly, or they'll say something flippant that doesn't actually relate to themselves, like world peace, then what that evidence is to me is that we're disconnected from our higher selves. We've never actually asked ourselves that question. Who am I? What am I? Where am I? When am I? What would give me joy? These are such fundamental questions that we just don't ask ourselves because we're so busy in the outside world. And so I guess for me, I just reached that point where there was something missing. And it was always an intuition. Up until that point, I was always actually scared of committing to a relationship because I just felt like there was something missing. I was out there always reading all the books in relation to what's going on in the rational world, avoiding the spiritual because I just had no evidence that such things existed. And so that was really what it took for me, was just recognizing that there was not going to be this uplift in incremental joy. And then through my journey, once I was able to release some of the childhood trauma that I didn't know was there, and these things were manifesting in my character in terms of anger, frustration, that itch, that knowing itch that something's not quite right, but I don't know what it is. And so once I was able to release those things, I got the message very powerfully. I'm like, part of your role here is to bring people to these transformative experiences, because you've made some mistakes along your journey working with these medicines. You can guide people towards medicines and experiences that are going to have a profound and lasting impact versus just taking psychedelics, which is obviously not the intention.
And do you enjoy this?
I do. It's Behold Retreats was kind of founded out of, as I shared, my motivation to help people find the good stuff. But what I'm really excited about, and I'm hoping to find actually a CEO to take over in the not too distant future. And I want to actually begin to consult governments on this subject, because there's a lot of people who are pounding the desk for legalization, and that's all good. But there's a certain energy to pounding the desk, and people with red hair and piercings, etc., are not necessarily going to be the ones that get the ink on the paper in terms of signing things into law. So one of my big motivators is actually to work on behalf of government, not to push legalization, but actually just to educate, right? Raise education in relation to this subject without any sort of agenda in terms of, hey, you should legalize this because it's good, because that's just not really in their interest, but just to help them understand this, and also to, collaborate with in-market HR and cultural management firms that understand the local context, so that these experiences and this understanding can be contextualized for an individual country, because obviously we've all got our own traditions and perspectives and sensitivities that bear a strong relationship to the nature of this work.
Yeah, and drugs, because at the end of the day, it's classed as a drug. They have a bad reputation. And whether it's Narcos, Mexico, or whatever. I mean, I was talking with my friends a while ago that I grew up with in 70s and 80s, rural Ireland, and drugs on the TV. I guess it was public health messaging. Basically, the message was, if you took drugs, you ended up on the street, homeless. And that was it. Your life was over. You were a drug addict. No one talked to you. You were the scum of society. And that's not my view. That's not what I'm saying. But this is what was drummed into us. And so that conditioning is really, 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 really strong. And for me to do something like this would take a lot of effort. I mean, drugs, they were just out. And so now you have huge drug problems like oxytocin and all of these things in the States as well. So how do you separate them?
Yeah, great question. And there's a few fundamental questions that I think are helpful in relation to distinguishing. And actually, I think The Economist did an incredible article on this, which is looking at, I think it's the top 20 substances and the amount of harm that they cause, and whether they cause harm to self and whether they cause harm to others, which is also a useful lens through which to look at these things. And alcohol and tobacco are one, no surprise. And then down the list, if I remember correctly, I want to say it was things like amphetamines, cocaine, and all the way down the list. And then towards the bottom of the list was a few of the psychedelics. So I remember LSD and psilocybin being there. MDMA also had a relatively low risk profile, although it is neurotoxic, so it's not good for the brain. You can still have very powerful and positive, profound experiences with MDMA. You just wouldn't want to do so on a regular basis. And it also does have addictive potential. In contrast, when we're talking about psychedelics, number one, they're non-addictive, right? So you don't wake up from one of these experiences and think, let's go again. I mean, you may do, but these are powerful medicines. They do a lot to our neurochemistry. And I've definitely never had that drive in terms of like going again the next day. So that's one aspect. There are people who do develop an addiction as kind of an escape mechanism, right? Which is what drugs ultimately are. So that's unfortunate, but it's a very small percentage of the population that develop that. And then, there are the other benefits. And so I guess the fundamental question I would always ask is, does this thing bring you closer to yourself, or is it bringing you away from yourself? And I think when we look at a lot of these drugs, right, tobacco, alcohol, it's bringing people, even caffeine, it's bringing people away from themselves rather than towards themselves. Whereas these medicines are bringing people closer to themselves. It's developing their sensitivities within and raising their vibration, right? What the medicine is fundamentally trying to do is to harmonize, reconnect, and harmonize body, mind, heart, and spirit to a single vibration, right? And so when people speak about these transcendent experiences that are possible, universal love, interconnectivity of all things, God consciousness, all of these life, creation, these mystical experiences that are well documented in the clinical trials, fundamentally, that's what's taken place, is that the body has achieved a single vibration, and then it's moved up into, a higher vibration and into mystical states of consciousness. Now, that's something that's obviously temporary, and you come down from that. But again, you've had the light shown, and now your job is to walk the path back in that direction and release all of those things that you are not, so that you can re-reach these states and this understanding through meditation and in every day, and ultimately drop meditation so that every day and every moment is your meditation.
Wow. I mean, that sounds so peaceful and calm as well. For me, that's what I feel when you speak like that. But it's interesting what you say, because I know my brother has tried ayahuasca a number of years ago, and he said to me, it's a thing that helped me, kicked me into gear to face my fears. It's all about letting go and connecting with our deeper selves. Important stuff.
Absolutely. That's beautiful.
Yeah, isn't it? And that's what you were saying. I mean, I think he's had it a couple of times, and I definitely know his life is going in a different direction, but he's also does mindfulness and meditation and so on. But what about people that just try this without going to somebody who can perhaps guide them correctly?
Even with very qualified healers, and if you're working with the top, I'm gonna be really elitist. If you're gonna work with the top like 1 or 2% of healers, they are so talented that these experiences become more deterministic in their positivity. Beyond that, and I've worked with a pretty broad variety, no healer on any given day with any given medicine is going to give you any sense of what's going to happen, because they don't know. And so I say that to be fair to people, definitely with a medicine like ayahuasca, absolutely doing it with the best guide that you can find. Like, that is my utmost recommendation. But even that being the case, these experiences can still be very, very challenging. You do want to remove as many of the unknown as you can, which there are many. You don't even know how many there are, but there's a lot. And I still don't know how many there are because I'm not a talented healer. I'm lucky to have talented healers on our team that continue to educate me. But there are so many things that are happening on so many different levels across mind, body, heart, and spirit as we go through one of these experiences. So would very much encourage people to take the time and the energy to really educate themselves so that they're able to make high quality decisions. One of the things that I always point out is that if you go to any of the retreat aggregator websites, what you'll see is that universally these retreats are rated as 5 stars. So that tells us a couple of things. One, people are having positive, profound, potentially life-changing experiences. Number 2, people have no idea what good looks like. And the degree of variability in the quality of work that's out there is mind-boggling. And so, yeah, just really encourage people to find the people who reflect the energy that they aspire to ultimately, and to make sure that you're not just clicking on some website, seeing some nice photos and booking now. Speak to a human being, make sure that they understand who you are and that what they are offering is aligned to where you're at, and that they've managed people from your sort of circumstances before. And fundamentally, you just feel really comfortable going and spending time with them.
You would say that about anything, really, I think, wouldn't you? Whenever you're trying to improve or do something for yourself, or even just go to a doctor or a dentist, you want to find someone you can have a relationship with, that you'll connect with on the right level, and you don't feel like they're talking down to you or using you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's another aspect in this, is a lot of people, they are inclined to encourage their clients to establish a dependency upon them. And that's also a real no-no, because all the answers are here. And this work is all about empowering the individuals and arming them with the tools and the understanding to continue to do their own work, not necessarily taking ayahuasca at home in the kitchen, but to continue doing their own inner work by themselves.
Your website has wonderful resources, I must say. And we'll put like the website in the show notes and everything, but to help to start educating yourself, if it is something you're interested in looking into, you reference TED Talks, you have articles. There was an article with a journalist, is maybe the one you mentioned earlier on, which is really, really a great article, I think. The TED Talk I listened to, which is a guy called Rick Doblin, who I think he's trying to get FDA approval for some psychedelics, but he says by the year 2070, he believes that psychedelics and psychedelic-assisted therapies will have penetrated mainstream culture enough to create a spiritualized humanity that's psychologically well-equipped enough to solve our seemingly intractable crisis and the environmental destruction and economic inequity. I mean, they're huge claims. But surely, in a way, the only way we are going to fix our planet and resolve a lot of issues is by having some sort of, whether it's a spiritualized humanity or a better understanding of humanity. So I don't know, is it a pipe dream?
I think I'm more optimistic than Rick. When I saw that number, I think he also tied to 2070 like a trauma-free world, right? And when I read that, I was like, man, that's 50 years away. And what I see is that, a lot more people are tapping into the very special skills that they have. So when we're talking about things that I never could have believed, things like clairvoyance, things like energetic healing skills, all of these capacities that I would have laughed at years ago. People are tapping into that. And once they do tap into that, they become very motivated to help. So I think we're in the midst of that becoming mainstream. In the last 2 weeks, there's been a front page article on the New York Times and the New York Post on psychedelics. And so I think there's massive mainstreaming. I think you were probably referring to Have a Good Trip, which is the documentary on Netflix, right? And so it's moving very quickly in that direction. The shortcoming is actually, I think, just how many people can we develop in terms of the energetic skills? Because that is so fundamental to this work. What we try to do is, there's kind of 2 models for this work at the moment. One is shall we say, the Western model, and the other one is the ancient wisdom traditions. And there's some differences between them, right? So in the Western medical model, what they're doing is you do 2 therapy sessions before, then you do psychedelic assisted psychotherapy for 3 hours. You have 2 therapists there, then you're left for a few more hours, then you go home, a few more therapy sessions. That's in essence what they're doing for the clinical trials. So really good on the mental and emotional stuff. They're giving people medicine and then they're helping them work through their stuff, and then some more mental and emotional stuff. They have no idea what they're doing on the energetic side of things, right? So there's no, whether we want to call it shamanic healing or quantum healing or energy work or removing lower level energies, transmutation of energy. There's many ways to describe what energetic healers are doing, but that's so fundamental to this work. Now, in contrast to that, we have the ancient wisdom traditions, and you would think, okay, well, certainly they have all the answers. They've been doing this for thousands of years. And the answer is, to a large degree, yes, they do, and they have. However, the context in which they typically do this work is very different than a Westerner flying down from, London or from New York and going and doing an ayahuasca retreat for a week. The trauma that they're bringing and the context that they're coming from is very different from an indigenous community, right? So these indigenous communities have been doing this work for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so they don't carry intergenerational trauma in the same way that we have. So we have much deeper stuff that we're often coming with. And so we actually need a lot more of the mental and emotional work to help us prepare for these experiences, sit through one of these experiences, and to help us integrate it once we return to our everyday life. Because unlike those indigenous communities, we're not spat back out into a village where we've got all of our uncles and aunties and we're having group dinners. And that's not the life that we live, right? We live in our own house with single family units and often not even multi-generational. So we live a very much more separate or disconnected sort of life and experience. And so what we're trying to do with Behold Retreats is very much to bring together the best of both worlds, right? So how can we make sure that people have the tools and the mental and emotional understanding of where they're genuinely at ahead of the medicine work? There's likely to be some challenges in relation to that during the medicine work. And then how do we help them integrate that while also benefiting from the, energetic healers that are there at our retreats?
And we talked about energy earlier, and I often think about it as the ripple effect, I suppose. The energy that we put out into the world is reflected in pretty much everything we do. I experiment with this, like by walking down the street and smiling at people. And some people will smile back. I even had people saying hello to me in London one day as I was walking around smiling. But often people don't. And I guess we are all on this continuum as well, aren't we, of maybe feeling that our outer world is somehow responsible for our inner being, and feeling angry with the outer world for not feeling happy inside. And I guess that is our responsibility. And I think a lot of us don't believe that it is our responsibility to sort ourselves out.
Absolutely. That's the whole paradigm between victim, perpetrator, and savior. And all 3 of those points on the wheel are not the right place to be, right? And we've had a few clients that are stuck in the victim mindset. We generally screen them out. We do our utmost, because actually the amount of work that's required when people truly believe that the problem is on the outside, you're actually working against those clients. And I'm not saying those people don't deserve to be helped. They absolutely do. We want everyone to be operating at the highest level, but just the amount of energy, and they just need a different container than what we typically provide. So we tend to work with clients that are already in the flow of self-improvement. If they're really stuck in that, the world is out to get me and poor little me, like yes, this work can absolutely help those people, and the science definitely supports that. It's just that they need a lot more of the mental and emotional attention in order to get the most out of this work.
The word that keeps coming to me as we're talking is surrender. I mean, there's an element here of surrendering the ego, surrendering the fears, surrendering. That feels quite frightening, I suppose.
It is. There's a conference I attended last year that was titled Dying and Living. And the whole concept is exactly that you need to surrender your ego and have your ego death, right? What we often refer to as the dark night of the soul, which I think is a misnomer. It's actually the dark night of the ego, I think, is a much more accurate description. And so then it's the beginning of the soul, rather than the soul first, ego second, rather than the other way around. And that is, fundamentally, that's a transition, quote unquote, attainment, a point, an experience that we are looking to have ultimately through this work is to completely surrender the self. And in that moment, it is scary, right? Because you actually believe that that's it for you, that you are going to die. And to a great degree, psychologically, the small self is dying so that your higher self can come to the fore. And so surrender is the perfect word. In our course, I always encourage clients, like, unless you have an intention that is so strong that's like already come to you and you know what it is, start with surrender, because there's so much social programming, there's so much trauma, there's so many limiting beliefs, there's so much structure, there's so much over-identification with the mind, right? A large part of this work is just simply returning the mind to its rightful place in the hierarchy of self. And it's not at the top as we think it is so commonly. The spirit is up there at the top. And once we've connected with the spirit, then everything else will fall into line. And there's these moments of clarity where every bone, every muscle, every cell, and every essence of your being is in full alignment, and you can go, okay, this is what it means to be human. And these are words that you won't find in the front page of everyday news. And to be able to experience absolute divinity and to know that that's your essence is something that I hope that every human being can experience during their lifetime, because there's just simply no coming back from that. And being able to, even in those moments of doubt and fear that still do persist, in those moments, we can always reconnect to that deep understanding of what we truly are, and recognize that this is just a stage where life is convincing us to pay attention to the outer world. And this is just a stage for the play of life to unfold. And we can engage in it in a much more exciting and interesting way once we have that recognition.
Wow. And what came up there for me is infinite possibilities. I mean, that's really what you're talking about in a way. And even if you think of the world of work, so many of us go to work from the head up. And we believe that that's all we need. We place such emphasis on our brain being so critical and crucial to everything, or our mind, when actually connecting with the rest of you opens you up to infinite possibilities.
Absolutely. And that's what the universe wants, right? So whenever we see things that are designed to constrain, universe is just consciousness itself expanding in infinite possibilities, as you said, in infinite directions. So there's no good and bad, right? My perspective of like good and bad and judgment and all of these things has shifted so entirely, completely. And it's just consciousness exploring itself and experiencing itself, individuating, potentializing in the infinite possibilities. It's not random permutation. It's just expansion and exploration for the sake of that very same thing. And so to recognize that not only that, but we are part of that single thing. And the mind itself is just, the brain is just a modulator for consciousness. So the matrix of consciousness that each of us has is just a filtering device. And so the thoughts that we're having, it's the filters that's getting caught, right? It's the negative self-talk, I shouldn't have done this, or I'll never get in good shape, or all of that stuff. That's just your filter. And so the moment you change your filter, thoughts will change. And so not only that, but then we can rejoin the collective consciousness and recognize that, holy, we're all just one thing. And again, coming back to Sting, maybe I'm going to start to treat other people a little bit differently. Maybe I'm going to start to treat the planet a little bit differently, because this is the same organism. It's not a different organism.
You're part of me, not apart from me.
Love that. Love that.
And that's amazing. Thank you so much. A lot of what you say there about even shifting perspective. One of the wonderful things for me about having a podcast is the guest, obviously, is speaking to people like you and other people. And I think perhaps you're the person that has challenged my thinking the most. Because when you originally reached out, I was like, I don't know if I want to talk to a guy about psychedelics. And I had to look at that side of myself and ask myself, well, what's the blockage here? And for me, I mean, I've tried hypnosis, I've tried meditation, mindfulness, all these things, but I've not done psychedelics. And now I'm thinking maybe that will be next. Beautiful. So thank you, because it's all about opening our minds. And you asked what, if you knew what's going to truly make you happy, or what's your purpose. For me, my purpose, I believe, in life is helping people to challenge their thinking. And that's what this podcast is about. I'm not telling anyone how to think, but hopefully by listening to this conversation and others, something drops into your consciousness that helps elevate that consciousness. So thank you so much, Jonathan, for the opportunity to speak with you and for hearing your story today.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. It's been such a pleasure and such an honor. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And now, how does somebody connect with you if they want to know more?
Yeah, come check us out on behold-retreats.com or at behold_retreats on Instagram. And unlike other companies out there, you have to speak with a real human if you're interested in doing an experience with us. So if that's of interest, hit the apply button and you'll speak with either myself or one of my team, and we can take it forward from there.
Fantastic. And again, thank you for your time this morning. And well, for you, it's afternoon or evening because you're out in Thailand. And I'll put all of those details in the show notes.
Beautiful. Have a blessed day, Susan.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you for listening today. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone you know who would enjoy it too. I believe we are all entitled to enjoy our work, and the future of work life will be changed by those who put people first and create more fulfilling work lives for themselves, their colleagues, their teams and organisations. If you have any suggestions for topics you'd like to have covered, guests you'd like to hear from, or questions for me, please drop a line to Susan at beyond-thenumbers.com. And finally, please consider leaving a review.